Okay, so the Killer Bees trio of Ben Roethlisberger, Antonio Brown, and Le'Veon Bell at one point had all the potential in the world to become a dynasty. But as it stands today, the Steelers haven't won a Super Bowl since the 2008 NFL season, and all three members of this iconic trio find themselves retired. So that begs to ask the question, what the hell happened to the Killer Bees? How did three of the most talented offensive players of the modern era fail to win a Super Bowl or anything at all? So, without further ado, let's dive into the grimy depths of the Pittsburgh Steelers and discover all the factors that led to the failure of the most talented trio in NFL history. First, real quick, we have to establish some lore. The year is 2004, and after a rough campaign in 2003 where the Steelers led by Tommy Maddox went 6-10, their mediocrity was immediately rewarded with the 11th overall selection in the 2004 NFL Draft, where they brought in the head of the Killer Bees in Ben Roethlisberger. So with Ben Roethlisberger alone in Pittsburgh for the time being, he put up very good stats over 6 years with the team, but more importantly, he proved that he was a winner, as Ben won 2 Super Bowls with the Steelers in 2005 and 2008, only raising his personal expectations higher and higher for the future to come. But after falling back down to earth following a 9-7 2009 campaign where the Steelers missed the playoffs, Ben got the best gift he could have possibly asked for when the Steelers drafted both Emmanuel Sanders and Maurkice Pouncey, and then in the 6th round of the 2010 NFL Draft, the Pittsburgh Steelers snagged one of the greatest draft steals in NFL history when they selected Antonio Brown 195th overall, adding on the stinger to the still-forming Killer Bee trio. Now, from 2010 to 2012, Antonio Brown was still developing and was nowhere near his full form, as Ben Roethlisberger still preferred other more reliable targets at the time. But still, during this 3-year stretch, the Steelers showed that they could at least make it back to a Super Bowl as they fell to the Packers in the 2010 season in the big game, and then things fell off a little bit as they plateaued over the next 2 seasons, failing to win a single playoff game. So it was clear now that some additional help was in order. And although they did need some help, the offense as a whole was loaded with all the receiving and quarterback talent you could ask for. The one hole you could point at on the entire Steelers offense was the running back position. And I mean, no disrespect to guys like Rashad Mendenhall and, I guess, Jonathan Dwyer, but they weren't all that. So you probably could figure out where I'm going with this. But in the 2013 NFL Draft, the Pittsburgh Steelers brought in Michigan State running back Le'Veon Bell with the 48th pick in the 2nd round, adding the abdomen and the final piece to the Killer Bee trio of Ben Roethlisberger, Antonio Brown, and Le'Veon Bell. So, now that the groundwork has been set and our 3 morally gray protagonists have been introduced, we can now begin our journey, starting with the 2013 NFL season. Now, you'd think with Antonio Brown still truly finding his place in the Steelers offense, and with Le'Veon Bell just beginning to learn how to survive in the NFL, that the 2013 campaign would be boring. Well, as you'll learn throughout this video, the Pittsburgh Steelers aren't familiar with the word boring. To start the season, the Steelers played some of the worst football they had ever played under Ben Roethlisberger and head coach Mike Tomlin, as not only were Ben's 4-week stats just putrid by his standards, but the Steelers started out 0-4. Their worst start to a season since 1968, as even team captain Benjamin Roethlisberger was calling the entire team out for pretty much playing like the worst team in the NFL. However, at least part of their early struggles could be chalked up to the fact that their rookie running back Le'Veon Bell only played one game, that being his career debut in their Week 4 loss to the Vikings. So after getting Le'Veon as well as the rest of their receivers more equipped with the offense, for the next 7 games, the Killer Bees trio put up these per-game stats, as predictably the 2 experienced guys in Ben and the mentally stable Antonio Brown found their footing and carried the offense, while Le'Veon Bell was still working out some of the kinks in his game. Most importantly though, the Steelers simply started winning football games, and as the season began winding down, Pittsburgh, with a new identity formed around getting the ball out quickly to their speedy receivers, were considered one of the most dangerous teams that could sneak into the playoffs. Now, the only issue here was, in order to make the playoffs and overcome their horrendous start, during the last week of the season, the Steelers needed, and stay with me here, they needed a Chargers loss, a Ravens loss, a Dolphins loss, and a Steelers win just to sneak into the last wildcard spot in the AFC. And it somehow almost happened.
4 plays later, 4th and 2. This time, Nick Folk connects. He's winning because of this. Dre Kirkpatrick. Dre made a play. Pittsburgh cruises, beating the Browns by the final of 20-7.
The Steelers got business done, and both the Dolphins and Ravens lost. So all that needed to happen to allow the Killer Bees' first ever postseason appearance was for the San Diego Chargers to lose to the 11-4 Chiefs. Here's the issue for the Steelers though. The Chargers needed this win badly to get into the playoffs instead of the Steelers, but the Chiefs on the other hand had already clinched their own playoff spot, so instead of Alex Smith and Jamal Charles, the Chiefs rolled out Chase Daniel and Niall Davis, so it wasn't looking too good for those Yinzers in the Midwest. But my God, somehow the Chiefs did it. The Chargers tapped into their well of depression once more, and with the game tied at 24 apiece, the Chargers allowed Chase Daniel to pick them apart, leading to a 24-yard pass play to the guy who cooked up my Big Mac last Thursday. So the Steelers watched from their TV screens as the ever-reliable Ryan Suckup slowly trotted onto the field to attempt a game-winning 41-yard field goal, but it just wasn't meant to be, as the kick just barely missed, and Steelers fans everywhere were in shambles. In overtime, the Chargers pulled off the win thanks to Chase Daniel being Chase Daniel, which meant Chargers in, Steelers out, and the Killer Bees were kept out of the playoffs in their first season of formation. So season number 1 under the new Big 3, or I guess 2.5 at this point, was concluded. And not only was this season a success with Ben Roethlisberger keeping up his consistent play, AB blossoming into a star, and Le'Veon showing promise, but as will prove to be a luxury in the future, the offseason of 2014 was calm and boring. Well, by their standards at least, as of course, each of the Killer Bees brought some form of headline and drama to the team. We'll start out light by looking at Antonio Brown, who was involved in some confrontations, but kept a level head and stood up for his quarterback and directed a message at former wide receiver teammate Emmanuel Sanders and said, "You don't throw your quarterback under the bus." So, there's that, I guess. Then Le'Veon Bell turned up the gas and smoked it all, as he and newly acquired running back LeGarrette Blount were both pulled over and arrested for driving under the influence. And this little issue will come up again in a few seasons, but for now, of course Le'Veon addressed the situation with the most Le'Veon Bell response possible. Also, I guess good old Big Ben got some batting reps in before a Pirates game and ended up hitting Pittsburgh's pitching coach, which doesn't matter at all, but I don't know. I thought it was pretty funny. Anyways, back to football. As the 2014 season officially began, the year started off with some flashy plays by their stars, but eventually the Steelers slowly began to cool off. The good news was that among the Killer Bees, Antonio Brown was quickly becoming one of the most unguardable players in the entire league. But although his development was going well, the rest of the team was struggling hard, and all of their problems were summed up in a humiliating 31-10 loss to the Browns in a game where Cleveland's quarterback Brian Hoyer completed just 8 passes. But at the end of the day, Pittsburgh's talent was just too much for teams to handle, and from week 11 on, the Steelers truly hit their stride behind the Killer Bees, as all 3 guys were playing the best football they had ever played, with Le'Veon Bell in particular exploding during this stretch of time, becoming arguably the best running back in the entire NFL. So after 4 straight wins to end the season, both Antonio Brown and Le'Veon Bell made all-pro teams while Ben made yet another Pro Bowl team, and the Steelers finally got back to their old ways and won the AFC North, except this division title came at a price. Eventually, Le'Veon Bell's heroic season was put to an end, as in the final game of the regular season, Le'Veon Bell suffered a hyperextended right knee injury, which would keep him out for the Steelers' upcoming wildcard game against the Ravens. Now, I probably don't need to say it, but this was a huge deal, as the Steelers just lost a massive piece to their offensive identity, and after cutting LeGarrette Blount earlier in the year, they were now forced to scramble to find a replacement running back a week before the playoffs began. So the Steelers went dumpster diving and picked up Ben Tate, former Browns running back who torched them earlier this year. And with that, the Killer Bees, with a new member, took on the Ravens at home, and unsurprisingly, it didn't go well.
3rd and 4, Roethlisberger to Ben Tate, in and out of his mitts and picked off by Pete Sizzle. Flacco to Crockett Gilmore, the rookie out of Colorado State, his 2nd career touchdown in the Ravens.
Without the help of the 3rd true member of the Killer Bees, the Steelers just didn't have enough firepower, and Ben Tate's 19 yards and a fumble weren't exactly helping the case, as Pittsburgh would fall in the first round of the playoffs to their greatest rival. Although the ending to the 2014 season seemed a little anticlimactic and somewhat unlucky in the grand scheme of things, if anything, this season proved without a shadow of a doubt that this new trio in Pittsburgh was more than enough to carry the entire offense single-handedly. And after breaking several offensive records last year, the Killer Bees looked towards the future, rightfully believing their best football was still ahead of them. But although all of that wishful thinking was great, a problem had continued to brew within the Killer Bees. And that problem was drama, as during the 2015 offseason, Le'Veon Bell carried the bulk of the attention by having his little mishap from last year finally settled, as it was announced that Le'Veon Bell would be suspended for the first 2 games without pay to start the 2015 season. Now, besides Le'Veon paying the price from last year, both Antonio Brown and Ben Roethlisberger remained relatively quiet, and even in Ben Roethlisberger's case, he was able to get basically a lifetime contract from the Steelers, locking him into Pittsburgh for the rest of his miserable career. So with that, the table was set to start the 2015 season, a year that would prove to be one of the most bizarre under the trio of the Killer Bees. This season was a wild ride, as immediately in their first game of the season, the Steelers without Le'Veon Bell lost to the defending Super Bowl champion Patriots in the season opener, and their tight ends coach allegedly fought a Patriots fan at halftime, and with that, the circus of the 2015 Pittsburgh Steelers was officially open to the public. Things seemed to calm down just a little bit going into their Week 3 contest against disaster artist Jeff Fisher and the Rams, as the Killer Bees were reunited on the gridiron and walked away with the win. Except as the game came to a close, Ben Roethlisberger, the glue that held the Steelers' offense together, was carted off the field with an apparent left knee injury, keeping him on the sidelines with a clipboard for at least the next 4 weeks. So, with the Good Samaritan out of commission for the time being, the Steelers then looked to their newly acquired backup quarterback for help. So, who would replace Big Ben's leadership position in the Killer Bees trio? Michael Vick. I am not lying to you. At one point, the Steelers had a quarterback room of Ben Roethlisberger and Michael Vick. Anyway, for the next 3 weeks of Michael Vick throwing the rock instead of Ben, it was a mixed bag, as Le'Veon Bell benefited greatly from less passes downfield as he was averaging more yards per game than he ever had before, but Antonio Brown had a different experience without Ben throwing him the ball. AB had the worst 3-game stretch he's had since his junior season in the NFL, as the man who was widely considered hands down the best receiver the league had to offer averaged barely 4 catches and 40 yards a game, as he watched his historic 35-game streak of having 5 catches for 50 yards go up in flames. Now, although things were admittedly looking a little rocky, with Ben Roethlisberger expected to return for an imperative Week 8 game against the division rival Bengals, the Killer Bees were set to be reunited, and I guess they were, for like a quarter and a half. As I just said, in Week 8, with the Killer Bees reunited, they took on the undefeated orange-hot Cincinnati Bengals, led by a lethal offensive duo in AJ Green and Tyler Eifert, and more importantly, a ruthless, punishing, and straight-up mean defense. The type of defense the Steelers were once known for. So with that introduction, allow me to introduce you to the villain of this story. You know him, you probably hate him, Bengals linebacker Vontaze Burfict. And in this particular game against the Steelers, he seemed to have a bone or 2 or 3 to pick with the entirety of the Pittsburgh Steelers. This game was straight up physical, which of course was expected between the Steelers and Bengals, but at some points maybe got a little dirty, as after a simple check down to Le'Veon Bell, Vontaze Burfict tackled him to the ground while Bell's leg was trapped underneath Vontaze. This resulted in Le'Veon Bell tearing his MCL, ending his season for the 2nd year in a row. But allegedly, this was Vontaze Burfict's goal, as several Steelers players accused him of celebrating his forced injury on Bell, and to take things even further, Le'Veon himself said it wasn't just Vontaze either, as the whole Bengals team was pretty much doing everything they could to do the little dirty stuff in between plays. But as you'll see in just a minute or two, Vontaze Burfict will be a recurring villain, and quickly became the most hated man in Pittsburgh. Regardless of those shenanigans, the Steelers went on to lose that game to the Bengals, and tragically, with Le'Veon Bell's season now over, the Killer Bees never played another game in 2015, as the trio finished the year barely playing even 2 games together on the entire season. But the 2-man game between Ben Roethlisberger and Antonio Brown was enough to keep the Steelers afloat, as with Ben back and healthy, Antonio Brown once again snatched the crown as the most dominant receiver in the game, dropping one of the best games of his career in a game versus the Raiders, where he simply was the entire Pittsburgh offense. So despite the hurdles, the Steelers finished the 2015 season with a 10-6 record, coming in 2nd in the AFC North behind the Bengals, which meant they would play a road wildcard game for the first time since 2011. And in storybook fashion, our heroes traveled right back to Cincinnati to face off against the Bengals in a game that would prove to be one of the most notorious in recent NFL history. Now, although the Steelers came into this game injured, the Bengals honestly probably had it worse, as they lost quarterback Andy Dalton for the season in early December, forcing them to start A.J. McCarron for their most important game of the season. So the hospital game began, and the teams went back and forth for most of it. But then as the game raged on near the end, with just under 2 minutes left, all hope looked lost for the Steelers, as the Bengals got a massive A.J. Green touchdown to take the lead for the first time all game. And even worse, Ben Roethlisberger was on the sidelines dealing with a painful joint sprain in his throwing shoulder, so Captain Ben was probably shut down for the night, and all hopes of a win for Pittsburgh probably went down with him. So Landry Jones, the Steelers' third backup quarterback, trotted onto the field, and every Steelers fan's worst nightmare then came true, as the same guy who took Le'Veon's season away from them now seemingly ended the entire Steelers team season as well, as Vontaze Burfict picked off Landry Jones, all but icing the game. All that big talk and physical play from Vontaze Burfict and other guys like Adam Jones all game long was somehow paying off, for like 14 seconds, until the Bengals immediately bungled the ball right back to Pittsburgh, and Cincinnati's defense had to drag themselves right back onto the field. So, capitalizing on the Bengals being the Bengals, the Steelers began to start their final drive as somehow Ben Roethlisberger crawled back onto the field, and after a few checkdowns and runs, the Steelers found themselves in a tough 4th and 3 situation. With one killer bee incapacitated and the other barely able to move his arm forward, of course, the Steelers went to the last man standing, and Antonio Brown came through to keep the season alive. But although they picked up the first down, the Steelers still seemed pretty screwed, as they needed to get at least 15 yards to get into field goal range, and they had no timeouts. So on 1st down and 10, Ben Roethlisberger dropped back and fired one of the most consequential passes in Bengals history.
Roethlisberger from the pocket, middle field, incomplete. Gonna be flagged for this on the hit on Antonio Brown, and it's gonna put the Steelers in field goal range.
What a meltdown. Vontaze Burfict, the man once accused of headhunting and intentionally injuring players, turned out to be the main reason the Bengals would fall apart in the final seconds with a 15-yard very unnecessary penalty, and then his partner in crime, Adam Jones, added 15 more yards on top of that, which set up a chip shot field goal to send the Steelers on to the divisional round of the playoffs. For the Bengals, it was despair as usual, and even for the Steelers, although they would move on to face the eventual Super Bowl champion Broncos, a bruised and battered Pittsburgh team with no Le'Veon Bell, no Antonio Brown, and a still injured Ben Roethlisberger would lose the game in honorable fashion, 23-16. Yet another tough season that could have been something special if the 3 members of the Killer Bees were healthy, but I guess there's always next season, right? And as the 2016 offseason began, this might have been their most quiet to date, as Ben stayed under the radar recovering from his injury, while Antonio Brown also stayed out of the spotlight and was even able to restructure his contract, finally able to get paid all of the money he deserved. Le'Veon Bell, however, in 1 year, upgraded from just being a performer in the circus to the goddamn ringleader. He decided to start the offseason off by establishing himself as debatably the best rapper in the NFL and definitely the best on the team, but we'll get more into that later. Besides this little side hustle, Le'Veon also once more found himself in some lukewarm water, as it was announced he would be suspended for the first 3 games of the 2016 season due to more drug complications, which proved that his past issues that greatly damaged his career just last year were still haunting him greatly in the present, and most likely the future as well. So you know the drill at this point. With that, we move into the 2016 Steelers campaign, where after a unique headline took the majority of the press for the Steelers early on, Le'Veon Bell eventually returned to action, and once he did, the Killer Bees trio was once more unleashed upon the entire NFL. And of course, these 3 showed how dangerous of a threat they were to the rest of the league.
Roethlisberger, pumps and throws, touchdown! Roethlisberger looks, crosser, Brown, he caught it, fights to the goal line, breaks the plane!
They did it. For the first time since 2014, these 3 were almost 100% healthy for a full season and had their ups and downs, but overall, this was still a lethal offense with Ben and Le'Veon Bell having great years as they do, but this is where things get a little hairy. To this point in his career, Antonio Brown has always been nothing short of a model NFL player, but possibly, coincidentally, after his neck was almost dislodged from his body, he started acting a little unstable from time to time, and even more concerningly, in 2016, he found himself having one of the worst seasons of his entire career, which by regular human being standards was still great, but by comparing his 2016 stats to his stats just last year, it's clear that something's changed. And when you add on some really weird headlines AB was involved with throughout the year, the train could have gone off the tracks very quickly. But luckily for them, that didn't happen yet, at least, as the Steelers went 11-5 in 2016 and slaughtered the Matt Moore-led Dolphins in the wild card, led by immaculate performances by all three members of the Killer Bees in their first playoff game together, which set up a divisional round matchup with the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, the game itself was just about as boring of a game you can possibly watch. The Steelers won the game 18-16 without scoring a single touchdown, as Le'Veon Bell'd all over the field. But the real significance in this game is what happened directly afterwards. While the Steelers celebrated their victory in the locker room, the ever-increasingly unpredictable man that was Antonio Brown decided it was a fantastic idea to grab his phone and go live on Facebook and live-streamed head coach Mike Tomlin's speech to the team. And even worse, instead of, listening, the man seemed a little more interested in himself. Now, besides the fact that Mike Tomlin called their next opponents assholes, the worst part about this boneheaded decision by AB was the reaction of the people around him, as just a day later, you had former teammates going on air to reveal that Antonio Brown was, quote, self-absorbed, and everything he does is always about Antonio Brown and nobody else. Now, although all of this recent drama wasn't great, everybody would forget this little Facebook slip-up as long as the Steelers won their next game. However, the team that was the NFL equivalent to a brick wall stood in the way of the Killer Bees' hopes and dreams of reaching a Super Bowl. And that team was... I bet you didn't see that coming. Of course. The New England Patriots came into this game in the middle of a 9-game winning streak and wielded a buzzsaw full of blood. And after the Steelers failed to score a single touchdown the week prior against the Chiefs, people didn't expect things to go well against the Patriots, who sported both the best offense and best defense in the league that year. And yeah, simply put, the game went horribly, as what has come to be a theme in games where the Steelers lose, one of the members of the Killer Bees trio in Le'Veon Bell went down with a groin injury late in the first quarter, and after an explosive third quarter and a perfect Thomas Edward Patrick Brady Jr. performance, the Steelers had lost the game 36-17. So, although the Steelers' 2016 season came to a close, this was the farthest they had ever gone under the Killer Bees, and rightfully so. Their expectations were only raised even higher going into the 2017 season. And for some even more encouraging news, things remained more or less the same in the offseason for this trio, as besides the normal goofy Antonio Brown activities and Le'Veon and AB's obvious, loyalty issues, things were pretty calm, except for two seemingly insignificant little details. Pretty much right after the Steelers season concluded, they made it a priority to retain the generational talent that was Antonio Brown, and despite his ever-growing unreliability, they signed the man to a brand new 4-year contract, keeping him with the Steelers through the 2022 NFL season. Then, as the offseason came to a close, the Steelers wanted to lock up the second member of the Killer Bees, as it looked like the Steelers had a 5-year deal locked in with Le'Veon Bell, until Bell himself turned the deal down, believing he could get an even bigger bag later on. And was he right? Well, we'll get there when we get there. For now, though, the 2017 NFL season began as, of course, the Steelers started the season out a little slow, as through Week 5, they found themselves sitting with a 3-2 record after a humiliating loss to the Jacksonville Jaguars. But we all know by now, with this much talent on offense, with the Killer Bees all on the field and healthy, you can only hold back this much talent for so long. And immediately after Week 5, for the rest of the season, the Steelers became in serious contention for the title of the best team in the entire league, and the Killer Bees started to click.
What a move! Now, stiff arm, and he throws down the defender. Oh, and it's caught! No, by Brown inside the 20!
From Week 6 and on, the Killer Bees ransacked the NFL with force and flair, and only lost one game during the rest of the regular season. But although all of that was cool, we gotta look at two specific regular season games that stood out from the pack for very different reasons. It's week 7 of the 2017 season, and the Steelers would find themselves hosting the Cincinnati Bengals. Everyone was expecting bloodshed, and that's exactly what we got. In the aftermath of the shot heard around the world by Vontaze Burfict a few years back, Antonio Brown and Vontaze went back and forth on whether they were on good terms or not. But if there was any confusion on how AB and the rest of the Steelers felt about Vontaze, it was definitely cleared up in this game. With the game in its final act, on another normal check down to Le'Veon Bell, Steelers rookie wide receiver Juju Smith-Schuster dropped Vontaze Burfict straight in his coffin. And after the game, Antonio Brown was definitely satisfied with his teammates' actions, as it seemed like the villain of Pittsburgh had fallen. Now that was cool, but then fast forward 8 weeks later, and the Pittsburgh Steelers have now won 8 games straight and had an AFC Championship rematch with the New England Patriots, where the winner of this game would effectively clinch the #1 seed in the AFC. The game itself was a heavyweight battle, with back and forth jabs from either side, and then in the final seconds, all hell broke loose when Ben Roethlisberger found tight end Jesse James for what looked to be a game-winning touchdown. Or was it? You see, after about a 10-minute review process, it was determined that Jesse James lost possession of the ball as he fell to the ground, and the pass was ruled incomplete, which led to a Pittsburgh meltdown where all the painkillers hit Ben at the same time, and he threw an interception on a fake spike play, sealing their fate. Now, the reason I'm mentioning this game is because this Jesse James incompletion was a huge topic for the NFL world at the time, and the consensus belief was that the Steelers were robbed, as the Patriots walked away like bandits with the ever-important #1 seed. So although the Steelers didn't win the game, they still proved that they not only could hang with the best of the best, but they arguably were the best of the best, as they finished the 2017 season with a 13-3 record, their best ever under Mike Tomlin. And the Killer Bees had their best season together to date as well, as Le'Veon Bell and Antonio Brown once more both raised their own personal bars, making All-Pro teams, while Ben kept doing his thing. But because of their unfortunate loss to the Patriots, they were now forced to play against the dangerous Jacksonville Jaguars in the divisional round, rather than the weaker Tennessee Titans, who the Patriots got the luxury to face off against. So the Jaguars traveled to Pittsburgh, and early on, they shocked the world, as they took a commanding 21-0 lead off of the back of their trademark suffocating defense, and Uncle Lenny delivering 2 touchdowns as well. But the Killer Bees were not going to go out this quietly, as eventually the Steelers scratched and clawed their way back into the game, bringing the game within 1 possession, and waited patiently for the perfect time to strike. And eventually, the time had come, and as the 4th quarter began, the Steelers' special teams came up huge and partially blocked a Jaguars punt to give the Steelers great field position to tie the game up. So with the Killer Bees all on the field at the same time, with momentum behind them and a perfect chance to take the game back, they just couldn't put all the pieces together, as the Steelers gave the ball right back to Jacksonville, then allowed 2 straight touchdowns, and after a failed onside kick, the game was over. The Jaguars, not the Steelers, would go on to face the Patriots in the AFC Championship game, and the best season the Killer Bees trio would ever have was all for nothing, as the Pittsburgh Steelers were sent home in the divisional round. So, the season was over for Pittsburgh, and pretty much immediately after this Jaguars loss, the drama surrounding the 3 members of the Killer Bees was shifted into maximum overdrive, and the beginning of the end of the most talented trio we may ever see officially started in the 2018 offseason. Now, although Antonio Brown and Ben Roethlisberger didn't have a quiet offseason, as in AB's case, the man made the Madden cover, which of course is always a good thing, but everything was overshadowed by one man, as Le'Veon Bell had a personal offseason so disastrous and entertaining that it stole all of the attention away from every other NFL player, which triggered the end of Le'Veon's time in Pittsburgh. For starters, remember how last year Le'Veon declined a long-term deal from the Steelers? Well, this year, Le'Veon doubled down and declined another deal from the Steelers, this one being worth $70 million, and he announced he was fully prepared to hold out for even up to half of the entire 2018 season if he felt it was 100% necessary. And as the offseason faded into the regular season, as the first week of the year came around for the Pittsburgh Steelers, Le'Veon Bell, sure enough, was true to his word and was nowhere to be found. And the Steelers started their 2018 season without their all-pro running back, as the stove of internal turmoil within the Steelers locker room had only just started to heat up. In week 1, the Steelers faced off against the Cleveland Browns, who had only won a singular game in the past 2 years, and ended up tying with them in one of the sloppiest and worst games the Steelers and Ben Roethlisberger had ever played, much to the delight of one Le'Veon Bell. So after whatever the hell that game was, the Steelers would go into a week 2 affair against the Chiefs led by Patrick Mahomes, preparing to start in his 3rd ever game. And the Steelers had an opportunity to bring their season out of the dark hole they had already created, but that didn't happen. Instead, they just kept on digging deeper and deeper. So it turns out the Steelers lost the game to the Chiefs 42-37 after putting up a historically good effort. But during the game, Antonio Brown was screaming at his offensive coordinator, demanding the ball in a game where he had 17 targets. So that wasn't great, and then after the battle subsided, Antonio decided it would be a great idea to respond to a Twitter heckler who was basically telling AB he's nothing without Ben by saying, "Trade me, let's find out," and then refusing to elaborate further by skipping practice the very next day. While watching the Steelers fall apart and his former Killer Bee member just completely lose it, Le'Veon Bell responded by having the time of his life on a goddamn jet ski in Miami. And meanwhile, while the castle was completely crumbling around him, Ben Roethlisberger, who had been the quietest member of the Killer Bees trio throughout this entire journey, was also sucked into the drama as well, as the man was directly involved in a crazy scandal between adult star Stormy Daniels and Donald Trump. What? Now, believe it or not, after this little kerfuffle the Steelers found themselves in, things actually calmed down, and for the next 3 weeks, the two Killer Bees went right back to solid football, and everything was back to normal. And then Antonio Brown threw a chair off of his roof. After a Week 5 win against the Falcons, reports said that Antonio Brown was going to be sued indefinitely after tossing various vases and pieces of furniture off of his balcony, almost hitting a small child. So yet another little fork in the road had appeared for the Steelers, and just like they had done before, they swept it under the rug and somehow got things under control, as they won their next 5 games in a row, including a demolition of the Carolina Panthers and a sweet revenge game against the Jacksonville Jaguars. And meanwhile, you can clearly tell that Le'Veon Bell wasn't happy with the Steelers' recent success. Or at least I think. And speaking of Le'Veon, around this time, he made it clear that he wasn't coming back to the Steelers this season. But you know, maybe the Steelers didn't need him anymore, as the Killer Bees, I guess, new addition in running back James Conner was holding down the fort very well, and their current record of 7-2-1 speaks for itself. So this set up a moment where the Steelers had 2 roads to pick from, one that guaranteed success and stability, and the other would bring them right back to their old ways. And well, unfortunately, the Steelers chose to completely relapse, and one of the worst 3-game stretches in recent NFL memory would occur.
3rd and goal. Over the top, and intercepted! And he does it. Good hold. And the kick is blocked!
In 3 straight weeks, the Steelers lost every game they played in hilarious fashion, blowing opportunity after opportunity to win each and every one of these games. And they now found themselves on the outside looking in on the playoffs. Also, during this time, Ben Roethlisberger lost his mind and went senile, going on his personal radio show and throwing every possible teammate he could under his bus, and then ran them over with spiked tires, saying things like, "I've earned the right to criticize my teammates. But of course, my teammates can't criticize me back." But despite their errors, this slip wasn't just the fault of the 2 remaining Killer Bees either though, but instead this was a whole team effort of a collapse, as after a loss to the New Orleans Saints in Week 16 and a Ravens win over the Browns the following week, the circus had come to a screeching halt under a veil of flames and drama, as the 2018 Pittsburgh Steelers missed the playoffs despite their overwhelming talent for the first time since 2013. And the headlines didn't stop there either, as Antonio Brown now officially had gone off the deep end, and for his troubles, the Steelers came to the conclusion that they just couldn't deal with him anymore, and they shipped him off to the Raiders, where he would have a long and productive rap career and football career in Vegas. As for Le'Veon Bell, although he already had 2 feet and a microphone out the door, Ben Roethlisberger made it clear that Le'Veon Bell would not be back under any circumstances next year, and Bell got what he wanted sort of, signing a 4-year, $52 million contract with the Jets, as he decided to continue to focus more on his other careers instead of football. So with that, it was now official. The Killer Bees were dead, and arguably the most talented trio in NFL history was disbanded. And now in the year 2023, despite both Le'Veon Bell and Antonio Brown being in their early 30s, all 3 members of the Killer Bees are retired from the NFL, hopefully never to be seen on a gridiron ever again. So, after a 5-year run from 2013 to 2017, and whatever the hell the 2018 season was, the Killer Bees racked up constant All-Pro teams with ease, and made it all the way to an AFC Championship appearance at one point. But because of their clashing egos, blatant chemistry problems, and locker room issues brushed to the side one after the other, eventually it all became too much, and the Killer Bees completely fell apart in such a short amount of time, leaving nothing behind other than the legacy of one of the most talented trios in NFL history to never win a Super Bowl. Anyways, if you like this video, then you should watch this video right here where I did a deep dive on what went wrong with Andrew Luck's time in Indianapolis and how the Colts completely broke the man. It's pretty good, trust me. Anyways, until next time.